Rain had been falling for hours, pooling in thin sheets along the cracked sidewalk, curling around the edges of the porch where I stood. My shoes soaked, my coat heavy. I lifted my hand to knock, but the door swung open before I could. A man appeared, tall, in a gray hoodie, eyes blinking slowly at me through the screen. He didn't smile, he didn't step back, he just looked as if deciding whether I belonged there. I'm here to see my parents, I said, voice tight. The words sounded small against the soft hiss of the rain. He tilted his head, then gestured toward the empty porch behind me. They sold this place, he said. Bought it from a woman named Evelyn. My stomach clenched. Evelyn, my mother, I swallowed. Do you know where she is? He shrugged, a half shrug that seemed both apologetic and indifferent. Not my problem, he muttered. The house behind him was wrong. The living room, once familiar, felt strange. The couch was replaced, walls painted a pale beige I didn't recognize, cabinets glossy where they'd once been matte. Only the faint smell of varnish and the creak of the old floorboards reminded me of the home I'd grown up in. Everything else had been erased. I took a step back, my wet shoes squeaking against the warped wood of the porch. I'm sorry, he added, glancing down at the ground. It was empty when I bought it. Those words hung in the air, empty, not lived in, not loved. My parents had been gone for months and I hadn't known, and yet some small part of me had expected them to leave a trace, a note, a call, anything. But there was nothing. Just rain and the quiet whisper of a house that no longer knew my name. I left before he could ask who I was. The screen door clicked behind me, sealing the distance. The rain was heavier now, running in rivulets down my coat, washing the edges of my sleeves. I walked down the cracked sidewalk, each step feeling heavier than the last. Somewhere inside I could still hear my mother's voice, faint, like a memory struggling to survive. I paused at the corner, glancing back at the house. The porch light flickered weakly in the gray wash of rain. The shadow of the man lingered in the doorway, and for a moment I imagined my parents standing there, waving, smiling, alive. But when the wind shifted, the illusion broke. The house was theirs no longer, only the rain and the quiet, patient waiting remained. The street stretched ahead, wet and empty. I kept walking, pulling my coat tighter, and realized something that made my chest ache. He hadn't said when they moved in. He only said the house had been empty. And that was the first clue that the world I had known, my parents, my home, my childhood, had quietly vanished while I was looking away. The motel room smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale coffee. Outside, headlights flickered across the rain-slicked pavement, cutting shadows into the thin curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, fingers trembling as I scrolled through months of emails. There it was, the transfer confirmation. $10,000 sent to my father's account 6 months ago. The memo line read, "For the house repairs." My chest tightened. I had imagined this money being spent on new floors, fresh paint, maybe a rebuilt porch. But now, it felt like a ghost, a note left behind for someone I would never meet. I tried calling the number saved under Dad Home. It went straight to a recorded message. The line you have dialed is no longer in service. My fingers hovered over the keys, unsure if I should try again, or if hearing a voice would hurt more than the silence already pressing against me. I checked the old address one more time. The numbers and letters stared back, unchanged, stubbornly familiar. Yet when I'd been there earlier, the house had belonged to someone else. Someone with no idea that it had ever been ours. The rain tapped gently on the window, each drop sounding like a clock, measuring the distance between then and now. I pulled the laptop closer, scrolling through bank statements, tracing every payment, every small withdrawal. My hands shook as I compared the dates. 6 months had passed since I sent that money. 6 months where my parents had vanished, leaving no note, no explanation, no trace. Had they needed the money to leave? Or had they been hiding from something worse? I pressed the phone to my ear again, then put it down. It felt heavy, alien, like holding a piece of the past that no longer existed. Outside, a car drove by, tires hissing through puddles, and I imagined my parents inside a motel somewhere, packing silently, watching shadows flicker on walls, wondering if I would ever come looking. The thought made my stomach twist. I closed the laptop for a moment, leaning back against the headboard. The room felt smaller, more confining than it had when I arrived. I could feel the echo of the house behind me, empty yet full of memories I could no longer reach. And then it struck me. If they had really sold the house, why hadn't they told me? Why leave me holding the money for repairs that were never done? I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain, tracing the quiet rhythm of a world that had moved on without me. Somewhere, beyond the walls and puddles, a truth waited, and I didn't know if I wanted to find it, or if finding it would finally close the door on the parents I thought I knew. Morning arrived pale and quiet, the sky overcast, soft light falling across the wet streets. I walked to the town's post office, the soles of my shoes slick on puddles, leaving tiny tracks on the concrete. Inside, the familiar scent of paper, ink, and wax envelopes greeted me. A smell I hadn't noticed in years but that tugged at memories of Christmas mornings and birthday cards. The counter was low, polished wood worn smooth from decades of hands passing over it. Behind it stood a woman, older now, with eyes that seemed to remember everything she had ever seen. I'm looking for my parents, I said, my voice softer than I intended. She studied me, blinked slowly, then nodded as if confirming what she already knew. Evelyn and Thomas Reed? Her voice carried the faintest tremor. They left, in a hurry. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward a stack of forms behind her. Didn't leave much behind. I felt my chest tighten, every beat heavy. Did they leave a forwarding address? I asked. She shook her head slowly. Your mother, she cried when she filled out the change of address form, but it never got processed. The words sank in like water through sand. She pulled a small envelope from under the counter, the paper thin and slightly damp. My mother's handwriting stretched across it, familiar and tender, and yet distant, like a voice remembered in a dream. I ran my fingers over the letters, feeling the texture of the pen strokes as though I could reach her through the ink. The envelope was empty, or maybe it contained a secret I wasn't meant to see yet. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, and I imagined my parents moving in the night, shoving boxes into a truck under the same gray sky, leaving nothing but the sound of tires and their own quiet breathing. The post office clerk leaned closer. Your mother looked scared, she whispered, like she was running from someone or something she couldn't explain. I shivered, imagining the small forms of my parents slipping through streets I couldn't follow, protecting me from a danger I didn't know existed. I stepped back onto the street, the envelope still clutched in my hand, rain beginning again, soft and persistent. The town seemed smaller somehow, its buildings shorter, its alleys narrower. I realized that with every unanswered question, with every empty window and unmailed letter, the world I had known had been quietly rewritten. And somewhere between the ink and the silence, a truth waited, fragile, hidden, and just out of reach. I walked past the shuttered bakery in the quiet park, imagining their footsteps ahead of me, wondering if I would ever catch them. And yet the envelope remained in my hand, a thin tether to the parents who had vanished, carrying the weight of everything they hadn't told me. The air was sharp that morning, cold enough to bite at my cheeks, and frost clung to the edges of the sidewalks as I walked to the house across the street. Mrs. Keating was outside, bending over her small garden, her gloved hands moving methodically among the wilting winter blooms. She looked up as I approached, startled, eyes wide, as if seeing a ghost she hadn't expected. You're back," she whispered, voice low, trembling slightly. I nodded, uncertain what to say first, the words catching in my throat. "I'm looking for my parents," I finally said. Her hands froze, soil crumbling through her fingers. They left at night," she said almost too quietly. "A moving truck. Around 2 a.m. No lights, no goodbyes." I took a step closer, rainwater dripping from my coat sleeves, and she leaned in, her breath cold against my ear. "Your father, he didn't want anyone to see them go. Didn't want you to know, and your mother," she was crying, whispering your name like she hoped you'd never hear. The words pressed against my chest, heavy and sharp. I pictured my parents shivering in the dark, loading boxes while the rest of the world slept, hearts pounding in unison, trying to disappear. Mrs. Keating straightened, her eyes flicking toward the empty windows of the house. "They argued that week," she added softly. "Something about money, something you sent. They were scared, yes, scared of what would happen if anyone found them." I felt my stomach tighten, a cold weight settling deep inside. Could it be me? Had the money I sent triggered the fear that made them leave? I wanted to ask more, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I watched her hands tremble over the garden once more, and the wind rattled the skeletal branches of the trees, whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. My eyes drifted to the house behind her, dark and hollow. For a moment I imagined shadows moving inside, my parents' forms slipping past rooms I had known, leaving only emptiness behind. I left the garden slowly, each step crunching frost under my boots, replaying her words over and over. They had vanished in the night, leaving nothing but questions, whispers, and a quiet street that remembered their presence long after they were gone. And somewhere in that silence, I realized that understanding why they left was as fragile as the frost under my feet. One misstep, and it would be gone. The agency smelled of coffee and printer ink, a mix of stale warmth and paper dust that made me feel both familiar and foreign at the same time. I walked past rows of blinking computers and faded "for sale" signs, each one a reminder of lives moving on while mine felt paused. Behind a desk cluttered with files and folders, a man looked up, expression unreadable, eyes narrowing slightly as I approached. "I'm looking for the records of my parents' house," I said, voice soft, trying not to sound accusing. He blinked, then gestured to a chair without a word. I sat, watching the papers stacked in neat columns like a story I wasn't supposed to read yet. He flipped through them slowly, muttering names and dates under his breath. Then he paused, finally reading aloud, "Evelyn and Thomas Reed, sold 6 months ago." My heart stuttered. My parents, the house, our home, had left my world without a single call, a single note. He laid the document on the desk. The numbers were stark, the price, half of what the property was worth. The buyer's name had been blurred, smeared as though someone had wiped it clean with wet hands. I leaned forward, voice tighter than I intended. "Can I see the original?" He shook his head, a faint, almost sympathetic smile. "Already collected by their daughter." The words landed like stones in my chest. I am their only daughter. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out the quiet hum of the office. I traced my fingers along the edges of the papers, feeling the smooth ink, the heavy weight of finality. The chair beneath me creaked like the old floorboards of the house I'd lost. I imagined my parents signing those forms, hands shaking, hearts pounding, while someone waited to ensure they never returned. They had vanished deliberately, leaving traces small enough that only a daughter who cared enough could notice. I left the office slowly, footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor, the receptionist's polite smile following me out. Outside, the wind pressed cold against my face, the sky overcast, matching the heaviness in my chest. I could see the street I had walked earlier, empty, quiet, carrying the memory of my parents in shadows and reflections. And somewhere in the swirl of clouds and frost, I realized I would have to trace every fragment of their past, every paper, every word, to uncover the story they had taken with them. The highway stretched out like a ribbon of gray through fog and frost, headlights slicing through the dim morning light. I followed the motel receipt like a trail of breadcrumbs, the numbers and dates burned into my memory. The sign came into view, flickering neon, half-lit, humming softly in the damp air. The building smelled of damp carpet and bleach, the kind of smell that feels permanent, pressing against your clothes and hair. Inside, the receptionist looked up from behind the counter, surprised but polite. I asked about my parents, the names Evelyn and Thomas Reed. He rifled through a small logbook, dust motes dancing in the thin beam of morning sun. "They stayed 2 nights, he said, paid in cash, left before dawn." He paused, frowning, and added quietly, "Your mom seemed scared, kept asking if anyone had called for them." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My fingers clutched the receipt tighter, white-knuckled. I asked him who might have been calling. He shook his head. "She didn't say, just worried about something, you know, the kind of worry that makes people leave quietly." His words hung in the air like smoke. I pictured them in that room. The dim light flickering over unpacked boxes, the sheets rumpled, silent except for whispered plans and hesitant footsteps. Did they glance out the window at passing cars, afraid to be seen? Did they watch the rain, counting seconds, hoping no one would follow? When I left the motel, the wind had picked up, rattling the sign above the parking lot. Each mile I drove back, the road slippery with frost, the weight of what I didn't know pressed harder on my chest. I imagined the fear in my mother's voice, the tension in my father's shoulders. Who were they hiding from? And how had the simple gift of $10,000, meant to fix a roof, a floor, a porch, ended up putting them on the run. By the time I returned to my motel room, the sky had turned a dull uniform gray, the edges of my hands cold from gripping the steering wheel. I pressed my forehead against it, imagining the quiet motel room, the dim lamp, the curtains swaying with each gust of wind. Somewhere inside, my parents had been moving, always moving, trying to protect me without telling me why. And in the stillness of the foggy highway, I realized that understanding the truth was no longer just about money or houses. It was about discovering the invisible thread that kept them alive and hidden from me. The storage unit smelled of dust and cold metal, the faint tang of oil and old wood lingering in the air. I hadn't been inside for years, and the key rattled in my hand as I unlocked the padlock, feeling the weight of time pressing down on me. Boxes were stacked against the walls like silent witnesses, labeled carefully in my parents' handwriting, photos, tools, old documents. I traced the edges of one with my fingers, remembering afternoons spent sifting through photographs, letters, and scraps of their past. The memory was soft, fragile, almost too tender to hold. At the back, hidden beneath a pile of yellowed papers, I found it, a small tin box, its surface scratched and dulled with age. My father's initials were carved faintly on the lid. It looked ordinary, but ordinary had never felt heavier. The lock was rusted, the key missing, yet when I lifted it, I felt something shift inside, a subtle weight, a presence. My heartbeat quickened. Should I leave it here? Should I walk away and pretend ignorance could protect me? But the pull of what might be inside was stronger than fear. I carried the box to my car, cradling it like a fragile animal, careful not to jostle it too roughly. Every bump, every small sound, made me imagine its contents. A letter, a photograph, maybe a clue to why my parents had disappeared. The sun was low in the sky, gray clouds pressing down, and I imagined them moving through the world somewhere else, afraid and cautious, and the box somehow connecting me to them in ways words never could. Back at the motel, I set the box on the bed. The metal was cold under my fingertips, a tactile reminder of the mystery waiting inside. I ran my fingers over the initials again, tracing each line, imagining my father carving it carefully, deliberately. It was a small act, yet it held intention, memory, and perhaps apology. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, imagining my parents' hands doing the same, folding letters, hiding documents, trying to protect me from something I didn't yet understand. I couldn't open it here. Not yet. I wrapped it in a soft towel from the motel room, careful, reverent. The box seemed almost alive, humming with secrets, and I realized it was the first tangible connection I had to the truth. And yet, even as I held it, I felt the weight of absence pressing in. The rooms I would never see, the words they never spoke, the life they were living somewhere beyond my reach. I didn't know what I would find inside, only that I had to. The locksmith's shop smelled faintly of oil, metal, and sawdust, the kind of smell that carries the weight of years spent opening what should remain closed. I watched silently as he worked, fingers steady, eyes focused. The lock clicked with a sharp, satisfying sound that echoed in the quiet room. I held my breath as the tin box finally surrendered its secret. Inside lay a single folded piece of paper, yellowed slightly at the edges, pressed flat, as though it had been hidden carefully to survive the years. The paper revealed two things: a bank statement and a note, written in my mother's hand. The statement showed a withdrawal. 10,000. The exact sum I had sent, the money I imagined repairing roofs and floors, now revealed to have traveled somewhere unknown. My fingers trembled as I lifted the note. The ink had bled slightly, smeared at the edges like tears had kissed it, and the words were hurried, tense, filled with a quiet desperation I could almost hear between the lines. If you find this, don't come looking for us. We did what we had to do. I sank into the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. The rain outside tapped a soft rhythm against the shop's windows, each drop a metronome for the thoughts racing through my mind. Why had they hidden? What danger had crept so close that leaving quietly was safer than saying goodbye? My imagination filled in the empty spaces, sleepless nights, whispered conversations, packing boxes in haste, glances over their shoulders. Every line in the note carried weight, the kind of weight that only the absence of explanation can create. I folded the paper gently, almost afraid to unfold it again. I traced the edges, wondering if the smudges had come from tears or hurried hands, each mark a silent testament to their fear. The world outside moved on, indifferent, while I sat with their message, part warning, part confession, part love, all weighted with mystery. It was both a connection and a reminder of the distance I couldn't cross. I left the locksmith's shop slowly, the note and bank statement tucked carefully into my bag. Every step on the cracked pavement felt heavier than the last, the world quiet around me, waiting. I kept thinking of my parents, moving through unknown streets, afraid, hiding, living in shadows for my sake, and I realized then that this was only the beginning, the first true clue that their disappearance had purpose, and that the road ahead would be full of questions I wasn't yet ready to answer. The address scribbled on the back of the note felt like a lifeline, delicate and fragile in my hands. I drove through fields coated in frost, the blades of grass silver in the weak morning light. The road was narrow and winding, the air still, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and old leaves. Each mile stretched the distance between me and the parents I thought I knew, and yet I felt closer than ever, pulled forward by the hope that the truth waited at the end of this lonely path. The farmhouse appeared slowly through the fog, a faint silhouette at first, then more distinct. Its roof sagged in places, shutters hung half open, and the windows were broken, letting the wind whistle through like a forgotten tune. I parked on the gravel path, boots crunching against the stones as I approached. The air inside smelled of damp wood and lingering smoke, a home abandoned yet full of echoes. Every step felt like trespassing into a memory, a life that might still contain a trace of them. On a table near the window lay a single envelope, my name written carefully in my father's hand. My hands shook as I reached for it, feeling the texture of the paper beneath my fingers, the weight of their presence pressing into my chest. Outside, the wind rattled the broken shutters, a soft accompaniment to the racing of my thoughts. I imagined them here, moving quietly through the rooms, leaving just enough trace for me to find them, yet not enough to fully reveal themselves. I sat on the floor, envelope clutched to my chest, staring at the fading light slipping through cracks in the walls. The farmhouse seemed suspended in time, a pause in the world where only I could bear witness. My pulse pounded, each beat syncing with the rhythm of my breath, the slow tick of silence in the corners. Whatever lay inside that envelope felt like the bridge between fear and understanding, between absence and connection. I hesitated, fingers trembling over the flap, imagining the words inside, promises, confessions, explanations I wasn't ready to hear, and yet, the anticipation was unbearable. My parents had left clues in careful handwriting, hiding in plain sight, guiding me through the fog of their disappearance. I realized then that this house, broken and silent, carried more than dust and shadows. It carried them, their choices, and a truth I was finally close to uncovering. I unfolded the envelope slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. My father's handwriting was deliberate, measured, yet every stroke carried weight, the kind of weight only truth can hold. The letter was brief, almost impossibly so, yet it felt heavier than a mountain in my chest. We sold the house to repay a debt, not ours, but yours. My stomach sank. Years ago I had unknowingly signed a small business loan, a predatory trap that carried my father's name on the dotted line. I had thought it cleared, forgotten, but it had not. Their words bled through the paper. They had sold everything to protect me, to shield me from collectors, from consequences I could never have understood at the time. The $10,000 you sent, my father wrote, was used to close the last payment. We had no choice but to leave. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling the tremor in my own body as if their fear had transferred through the ink. Their absence, their silence, their deliberate disappearance. It was all a sacrifice I had never anticipated. I walked through the farmhouse slowly, the air thick with the smell of old smoke and dust, each creak of the floorboards echoing the footsteps they had once taken. I imagined them leaving at night, careful, quiet, whispering my name into the shadows, hoping I would never see the fear in their eyes. And yet, here, in the folds of this envelope, was the full weight of their love, a love so protective it had erased their presence entirely from my life. The letter ended with a single line that made my throat tighten. "Forgive us for leaving before you knew why." My hands shook. Forgive them? I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask questions I didn't even know existed. but all that rose in me was a quiet ache, a longing to see them, to tell them I understood, even if too late. The truth was both a balm and a wound, healing some questions while opening new ones about where they had gone and how to reach them. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my chest, and sat by the window. Outside, the wind rattled the broken shutters, carrying the chill of a world that had moved on without them. I realized, in the quiet of that abandoned farmhouse, that the sacrifices they had made were both terrifying and beautiful. They had chosen invisibility over confrontation, absence over explanation, to give me a life I had yet to fully grasp, and somewhere in that realization, I felt a soft, aching connection to the parents I had lost and found all at once. Weeks later, I returned to the old house one last time. The street was quiet, the sky painted in muted grays, the kind of light that seemed to swallow details and soften edges. The new owners were away, or at least no movement stirred behind the blinds. I stood outside the familiar porch, breathing in the damp, earthy smell of rain-soaked bricks, listening to the faint hum of the neighborhood waking slowly. The door was no longer mine to open, the windows no longer framing my memories. And yet, a thread of connection lingered, fragile, unbroken. The porch light flickered faintly, once broken, now returning like a pulse, a heartbeat of the house itself. I imagined my parents somewhere beyond sight, watching, safe, breathing in freedom and distance, and for a moment, I allowed myself to hope. I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the letter I had found in the farmhouse, placing it gently in the mailbox. Whoever found it would not know the full story, but the gesture felt right, a final bridge between absence and acknowledgement. The wind stirred, rustling the leaves of the small tree at the corner of the yard. I paused, catching a movement behind the curtain, or maybe imagining it. A shadow shifted, just beyond recognition. My heart skipped, thinking it could be them, thinking for one fleeting moment that perhaps they had returned, silently observing, unseen but present. But when the wind settled, nothing moved. Still, the feeling lingered, like the faint warmth of a memory brushing my skin. I stepped back, the gravel crunching softly beneath my boots. The street stretched ahead, empty and quiet, carrying my footsteps into the distance. I realized that the house, once full of laughter, arguments, and whispered secrets, had become a vessel of absence and presence at once, a place where memory and reality coexisted, where their choices had left traces of love I could feel but not touch. And as I walked away, turning for one last look, the flickering porch light seemed to breathe with the memory of those who had vanished to protect me. Somewhere, beyond the walls and across miles, I hoped they were watching, quietly proud, quietly alive. The house remained, waiting and breathing, and I left with a fragile understanding that love sometimes hides in silence, in shadows, and in the spaces between absence and return.